and subscribe.
A murder is the ultimate guarantee of any criminal's loyalty, the only crime no spy from the police can ultimately commit. In Cooper's case, it had additional attractions. As well as testing him, it would involve him, giving the twins a hold on him for the future. It would also offer Ronnie a chance to cross someone off his list at no risk to himself. Ronnie proposed the idea casually to Cooper early in January 1968. Cooper agreed. The victim Ronnie chose was one whose death would place another gang firmly in his debt. He was a small-time London villain who some months earlier had started an underworld vendetta by firing a sawn-off shotgun into the groin of his young wife's lover. The wounded man was the brother of an important London gangster who was an ally of the twins. Already one man had been killed in error for revenge. Ronnie suggested that Cooper should get the right man. Normally this would have been impossible. The man was hiding, but Ronnie knew that in 2 weeks he would appear in public as a witness at the Old Bailey. Cooper appeared to treat the whole idea of killing him as a professional assignment. He said he had arranged a lot of murders in his time, but a killing at the Central Criminal Court was something of a challenge. He would employ one of his best men on the job. In the meantime, he would work out the means of the perfect murder. Reggie was skeptical. He began to change his mind a few days later when Cooper came to Braithwaite House to show them the weapon. This was no crude affair but a sophisticated means of killing a man in public with the minimum of risk. Cooper explained it as an old idea of his. The mechanism had been made to his design by one of the great specialists in the business. Cooper produced a small attach case covered in light brown pigskin. He opened it. Inside there was a hypodermic syringe held by 2 steel clips. By the handle of the case there was a small brass ring. Cooper pulled it. The hypodermic slid forward so that the full length of the needle was projecting through a small hole at the corner of the case. He touched the needle. This released a spring within the case that worked the plunger. Cooper was very cool about it all. Reggie was intrigued and asked for a demonstration. Cooper uncorked a bottle. Reggie sniffed. It smelled of almonds. Cooper said it was cyanide and filled the hypodermic. He set the spring, pulled the small ring by the handle, and the twins saw the needle slide out from the corner of the case. He pushed it against the sofa and a thin jet squirted from the needle. Cooper explained then how it would be used. Get close behind the man you want in a crowd. Pull the ring, jab the case against his leg, then make your getaway. He'd think that something stung him. In 5 minutes he'll be dead. Symptoms will indicate a heart attack. Perfectly normal. Only a thorough autopsy would spot the pinprick on the leg and there would be no evidence of cyanide in the stomach. Plans for the perfect murder went ahead. Cooper brought the man who was to do the killing round to meet the twins. A tall, white-faced young man called Elvie. He seemed an unlikely murderer, but he was somehow in character with Cooper. He told the twins that he had killed a lot of men. They spent some time with him, showing him photographs of the man he was to murder and having him taken to the Old Bailey. Then Elvie bungled it. He had his excuses and explained that the man never appeared in the central lobby as the twins had predicted. Cooper was angry but apologetic to the twins. He would immediately devise another means of murder. A few days later he produced a high-powered hunting crossbow firing steel-tipped bolts lethal to 50 yards. Elvie had found out where the man was living. He would wait for him in his car, then shoot him silently in the street. Again, it was a plan that would appeal to Ronnie. He and Cooper spent a lot of time discussing it, but once again a last-minute hitch prevented Elvie from making the kill. By now this hardly seemed to matter. Reggie was cynical, but Ronnie seemed to think that Cooper had established his credentials. And then towards the end of January, with the police still waiting for the twins' next move, Cooper got his final hold on Ronnie. He seemed to take the place that Leslie Payne had once held as father figure and advisor. Ronnie consulted him at any time of day or night. Cooper would always come and always leave him happy. He seemed to understand him perfectly. Ronnie confided his ambitions to him. In return, Cooper had the big ideas that Ronnie needed and seemed as thrilled as Ronnie by them all. They often talked about narcotics. Cooper had European contacts and understood the market. This was the quickest and safest way for the twins to become millionaires. As a start, Cooper suggested setting up a Fiat in Belgrave Square as clearinghouse for wealthy addicts and their pushers. Cooper had got as far as renting the flat when Ronnie said he wasn't interested. Other rackets they discussed were large-scale gold smuggling, further currency deals, a takeover of an existing marijuana racket carried on through the diplomatic immunity of some Pakistani diplomats, and the traffic in illegal Asian immigrants from Belgium. Each time Reggie's last-minute caution prevented Ronnie from becoming involved. Cooper was genuinely upset. Then he started talking of their oldest dream of all, the worldwide murder network operating with the mafia and the European syndicates. The time had come, he said, for the twins to visit Paris and the States to arrange things personally. In theory, this was quite impossible. The United States rigidly excludes known criminals, and the twins had Scotland Yard investigating them for almost every serious known crime, including murder. Yet Cooper solemnly suggested to the twins that they should fly to Paris, contact the leading gangsters in France, then travel to New York, where he would arrange more meetings with the top mafiosi in America. Reggie thought he must be joking. When it was clear that he was not, he said it was a trap. Ronnie replied that this was a risk worth taking. He trusted Cooper and could hardly wait to start the great new role he promised him. On the 2nd of April, Cooper and Ronnie Kray traveled to Paris on a scheduled flight. Nobody stopped them. As Reggie would not come, Ronnie brought an old friend, Dickie Morgan. Cooper had booked rooms in the Frontenac Hotel. Cooper seemed firmly in command. He took them out to dinner, talked of the possibilities of a European criminal common market. When you get trade between nations, crime follows, and next morning introduced them to an impressive Frenchman with grey hair and a Brooklyn accent. This, Cooper said, was the man sent to meet them by the brothers who controlled crime in the city. He was a knowledgeable man. He talked of how he had killed various people in the States, and how he spent some years in San Quentin prison before returning to France. Discussion followed on the sort of deals the Krays and the French gangs could fix together. The first need was for close liaison. Cooper said he was prepared to act as go-between. The Frenchman made it clear that several continental gangs regarded England as an unexploited market. They thought the narcotics trade could be doubled overnight. Expert criminals from Europe could fly in, commit a major theft and then fly back again. French gunmen could be used in England. Goods stolen on the continent disposed of there. They talked along these lines most of that day and visited the US consulate so that Ronnie Kray and Morgan could apply for visas. These were immediately granted. Cooper explained that the Paris consulate had no way of checking on the records of British citizens. Next morning all three flew from Orly to New York. This was the life for Ronnie. This was better than cowering in Bethnal Green and worrying about Reed. Ronnie had always known that he was someone special, but it was still exciting to have this confirmed. Immigration gave him VIP treatment. There were no questions, no examination by the customs. Cooper explained that the mafia had arranged things and their man was waiting. He was an old friend of the twins, a tiny Jewish Sicilian called Joe Kaufman. Ronnie had met him several times in London for business over gambling clubs and stolen bonds, and Cooper said that he had powerful connections with the mafia. As if to prove that Ronnie was the favored guest of the mafia, Kaufman took over, driving them to town from the airport, booking them a suite at the Warwick Hotel and acting as their host. Kaufman is hospitable by nature. He has a pretty wife and knows a lot of people, gamblers, boxers, and theatrical celebrities. With Ronnie, he did all he could to make him happy, introducing him that night to several boxers, including Rocky Marciano, taking him to clubs where he could find a boy or two, and paying for the endless rounds of drinks. Cooper, on the other hand, seemed ill at ease. He spent a lot of that first evening telephoning. Morgan noticed that his stutter was worse. He kept reminding Ronnie that he had friends to contact. Next day, when Ronnie started making his appointments, something had gone wrong. Angelo Bruno had mysteriously left town, so had the other leading mafiosi Ronnie had met and entertained in London. Cooper suggested telephoning other friends long distance in Florida and Las Vegas. They would be glad to know that Ronnie was in town. Ronnie might even make a trip to see them. When Cooper rang them, there was no reply. It was Kaufman and not Cooper then who saved the day by driving Ronnie to Harlem and Brooklyn to meet some old-time criminals he knew. This was no top-line gathering of the syndicate, but retired gunmen, former racketeers, old bootleggers. They were all characters willing to have a drink and ramble on about the old days, and Ronnie got on well with them. One gave him details of how gang killings were organized by rival gangs and spent an afternoon offering him technical advice about assassination. In return, Ronnie gave him his star-shaped diamond ring. Later he met the bodyguard of one of the ward bosses of Harlem. Again they talked of killing. Ronnie gave the man his 800-pound white gold and diamond bracelet watch. Cooper seemed increasingly elusive, but Ronnie was happy. He rang home to Reggie and his mother and that night went out again with Kaufman, drank, nightclubbed, saw Greenwich Village and a lot of interesting people. At one club Kaufman asked him what he'd like. He answered a brown boy about 18. Cooper was the only one who didn't laugh. He was concerned that Ronnie wasn't seeing the men he'd come for. The next few days were similar, with Ronnie in high spirits as they made the rounds of Brooklyn, Coney Island, Wall Street, and Skid Row. He drank a lot, ate sparingly, and met half the deadbeat criminals in New York City. New York appealed to him. He liked its size, its noise, its sense of possibility after the constraint of London. This was a holiday from Reggie and his worries, and from Scotland Yard. Kaufman was picking up the bills. The only blot occurred when Morgan realized that they were being followed, always by the same two men who looked suspiciously like plainclothes detectives. Ronnie was unconcerned, but on the night of the 8th of April, they spotted them again waiting outside their nightclub in a dark red Dodge. Morgan was certain they were tailing them all the way back to the Warwick, but Cooper said he couldn't see them. Kaufman thought they were probably from the FBI. Next day Cooper once more brought up the idea of flying to Las Vegas. Ronnie announced that they were going home. He came back to Bethnal Green in great style, bounding with energy, laden with cigars, transistor radios, a big woolly dog for his mother, a stainless steel model of a knight in armor for Reggie. If his absence had proved anything, it was how much the firm and his family relied on him for their existence. Ronnie was the center of their lives. Without him, life in Bethnal Green was ordinary and dull. Rumors had started that he had cut and run for it. Only 3 people in the firm had known that he was in New York. One of the shrewdest members of the firm had immediately decamped for Mallorca. Most of the remainder started thinking of the future. Even Reggie had fleetingly thought of making his escape and asked Tom Mangold of the BBC, who was off to the Far East on an assignment, if there were any way of getting out to Vietnam with him as a volunteer. The police had also missed him. For all the supervision of Tintagel House, none of them had known that Ronnie had so easily given them the slip and turned up in New York. Nipper did not discover until some time later, so at first, there was considerable concern that the prime suspect of their mammoth inquiry seemed to have disappeared. Just for a moment, it had seemed as if this might be a new trick of the twins. Everyone knew that there could be no question of arresting one while the other was at liberty to scare their witnesses. So Ronnie's return pleased everyone, and as he leapt back into action, he had the initiative over Reggie. He was the hero, proving that everybody's fears were groundless. Although he had not met the mafia leaders, the trip had been a great adventure. His fantasy was coming true. He could do anything. While all the rest of them were cowering from Reed and Scotland Yard, he had been to America under the very noses of the police. This was the way a man should be, killing his enemies openly, taking money where he found it, drinking, enjoying sex, insulting the police just as his Aunt Rose did. A few days after his return, he saw the film of Charlton Heston playing Gordon of Khartoum and came out of the cinema with tears still in his eyes. Gordon was a real man. He did what he had to do and he was bent like me. When I go, I hope I face it just like Gordon did. Certainly, there was no excuse for cowering pathetically until the police arrived to pick him up. This meant an end of Reggie's siege tactics. In place of caution, silence, avoidance of all risk, Ronnie was eager for a full offensive by the firm. Now was the time to streamline crime as he had heard they did it in the States. Big crime should be big business. On the return from New York, Cooper had flown onto the continent for business of his own, but when he came back he agreed with Ronnie, reorganize the firm on strict American lines, kick out the useless hangers-on, get working with a nucleus of tough professionals. There were whole areas of humdrum life waiting to be exploited on the American pattern: unions, taxes, building sites, the docks. What with their reputation and their knowledge, the twins could treble their income in 6 months. This could keep Reggie occupied. The idea of tying up the docks appealed to him. He made discreet inquiries among a number of top businessmen and politicians to see whether the docks management could use a properly organized force of strong-arm men in the next labor dispute. Drawing a blank, he tried the unions, also without success. Finally, he persuaded some rich businessmen to start a money-lending business in the docks. The twins would back it with a loan repayment service of their own. All this kept Reggie busy. Ronnie needed something more dramatic. Cooper kept telling him the time had come to show the world the Krays ruled London. He knew exactly how to work on Ronnie now. Maybe, he said, those mafiosi in New York had picked up rumors that the Krays were slipping, that the police would soon be catching up with them. This might have been the reason why one of them appeared particularly anxious to meet him. Ronnie was furious. In New York, it hadn't mattered who had entertained him. He had enjoyed meeting the men he did, but he could see that Cooper might be right. The only language the Americans understood was power. A few efficient killings would restore their faith in the Krays better than any arguments. As a beginning, Cooper suggested that Ronnie should do the Americans a favor. A well-known Las Vegas gambler and club owner had been challenging the mafia. The man lived part of each year in Kenya and was staying at the moment at the London Hilton. If the Krays quietly eliminated him, it would be excellent publicity throughout the States and would also place the mafia in Ronnie's debt. Ronnie agreed and promptly made his plans. The man took an early morning constitutional in Hyde Park, so Ronnie arranged to have him shot by a marksman from a passing car. But this was a wary man and an unwilling victim, who seemed to know how to avoid presenting himself as a target. After several failures, Ronnie saw that if he wanted a dramatic killing to impress the underworld, he must look elsewhere. Somebody suggested Caruana. George Caruana was Maltese and a West End club owner, a big, good-looking man. Recently, there had been talk of trouble between him and another club owner. Now came a rumor of an offer of £1,000 for anyone who killed him. It seemed an economic proposition for the firm. Ronnie had no strong feelings about Caruana, but a quick £1,000 was always useful, and it was necessary to get his message over to the mafia. As Cooper kept reminding him, the question of which London gang was to look after the big gambling junkets from the States was still not decided. Ever since Ronnie had read his earliest books about Chicago gangsters, he had dreamed of blowing someone up inside a car. In Sicily and the States, it is a well-proved mafia mode of death, but London gangsters had been slow to use it. George Caruana drove a bright red Mini. This could give Ronnie his big chance to show that the Krays believed in progress. There is no great problem in wiring a detonator and a parcel of explosive into the circuit of a car, but Ronnie had never been good with his hands, nor were there any real technicians on the firm. Once more he had to turn to Cooper, and once more Cooper brought in the strange young man, Paul Elvey. Apart from all his other skills, Elvey was a qualified radio engineer. 8 months had passed since Nipper Reed had taken charge of the inquiry against the twins, 8 months in which his men had most methodically built up a dossier on their history and then ground to a halt. There was a mass of detailed statements against them filed in Tintagel House, but until the twins were safely locked away none could be used. Also, the great investigation, for all its thoroughness, seemed to have missed the biggest crimes. There was no evidence linking the twins with Cornell's or McVitie's murders. There was no hint of what happened to Jack Frost, Mad Teddy Smith or the Mad Axe Man. No link had been established between the twins and the Clapham leader, Frederick Foreman, later to be charged with murdering Frank Mitchell and disposing of McVitie's body. Hopeful as ever, the police were waiting for the twins to make their ultimate mistake. Nipper was adamant that nothing must be done to scare them now or put them on their guard. The police were kept away from them, and the twins saw no sign that the whole of Scotland Yard was waiting to arrest them. As a result, it seemed that they were living in a sort of limbo. They had their freedom, but there was a shadow enemy who had to be imagined listening on every telephone, watching from doorways, never leaving them alone. Reggie was rational enough, but Ronnie made this limbo his own world, an airless, haunted place devoid of ordinary feeling. Killing was normal, cunning and violence the only ways of striking at the unseen terror of an unseen enemy. As the twins stood there in the bar of a pub in Bethnal Green with Cooper and Elvey planning another killing, all Ronnie's fantasies seemed to have turned into reality. Reggie was opposed to the idea of killing Caruana but unable to stand up to his brother. Cooper could have been the stuttering echo of Ronnie's madness. Elvey was nothing but a bespectacled technician. Ronnie had photographs of Caruana, a quiet-looking man with a plump face. Next day he would arrange for someone on the firm to take Elvey to see him in the flesh. Then the talk turned to the question of explosives. Ronnie explained that there was gelignite available. Cooper was not impressed. Gelignite was tricky stuff to use. Dynamite was safer. He had a source in Scotland. Elvey could easily fly up to fetch it. And so the plans for blowing up George Caruana in his red Mini went ahead. The next day, Elvey waited in his raincoat outside the Dominion Cinema in Tottenham Court Road and was picked up by a former boxer from the firm and driven through Soho. The former boxer showed him where the Mini was always parked. A little further on, a man was standing in the doorway of a club, George Caruana. They slowed down to let Elvey see the face he was to destroy with dynamite. 2 days later, Elvey took the morning flight from Heathrow to Glasgow, collected 4 sticks of dynamite from an address in the centre of the city and caught a taxi back to the airport. As he was boarding the London plane, the police arrested him. Later that evening, Nipper Reed interrogated him.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you